very good day to you, and welcome to yet another installment of our Media Monday series. Of course, with myself, your favorite global media maven, Vuyo Joboda, and I'm here to unpack another global media question and topic, of course, as we dissect how we can grow, evolve, and expand the content creation industry and economy, ensuring that we are instilling traditional production norms and values into the world of content creation. Now, as a content creator myself, I know some of the struggles and the challenges that we get to face, and I'm here to help you solve those, and I'm here to help you kind of navigate those as we are getting into this brand new year. On a high note, we all have these aspirations that we have and desires to create content, to grow our content capacity and our content bank. And we are hoping, of course, that this is the year where we kind of exponentially do that on a scale and on a quality and on a value that is of high importance. On today's installment, we are discussing podcasts. I hope that you checked out our previous installment last week when we spoke about pre-production and the importance of putting things in perspective and putting things in place. Today we are talking about podcasts, and I think I wanted to come into this particular point and this particular topic today, specifically before getting into production, because these are some of the questions that I definitely believe that we could be asking ourselves as we are kind of curating and thinking about what type of content do we do, and what type of content will be best suitable for our for our creation needs and for the things that we would like to communicate, expand, and share and explore within our journey of content creation. Now, today we are discussing podcasts, and I'm going to be talking about extensively the different types of podcasts that you can do, or other ones that if you are thinking what type of podcast would best suit my audience, what type of podcast would best suitable for me as an individual, or me as a business or a brand, then I'm here to help you unpack which would make sense for you the most. And this is another, this is a critical phase within our pre-production and within our ideation phase, that we understand if we are doing something like a podcast, me helping you kind of skim through these questions and skim through these types of examples to help give you a little bit more context as well is most definitely helpful. Now, I speak extensively about podcasts and the growth of this particular genre of entertainment and media. And we are seeing it exponentially grow in the year 2023. Statistics have shown that this is going to be 2024, that this year is going to be the year where we are seeing the rise of this genre of entertainment, but also we are seeing a stability of it within the content creation economy, where we are seeing a lot more individuals, brands, and businesses utilize podcasts as a marketing vehicle and tool, and utilizing it as a way, of course, to communicate brand messages, and of course to kind of speak on the things that are being sold and the things that are being brought to the public for that particular brand or product. And we're also seeing content creators now who are looking forward to cementing their voice within the world, finding this particular medium of entertainment as a viable source and a viable way to go about doing that. Minimum barrier to entry, and of course, a variety of access that is available at our disposal at this particular moment in time. I am of the belief, and I do know that as we are moving forward and seeing that this is going to be a rising industry, we are going to see it, of course, slowly but surely becoming regulated. We're going to start seeing it, become a sustainable industry, and we're going to start seeing ways in which it is there. A lot more barriers are going to be created for entry within it, and we're going to see it. How one gets into it and how one gets to create one particular podcast will be a lot more harder as we're getting into it, and the demand for it is increasing. I recently read a study and researched this particular point, that there is a high demand for podcasts. We've got listeners demanding and kind of speaking their concern that there aren't enough podcasts on the search engine. There isn't enough variety of types of podcasts. There isn't enough podcasts for listeners to have the ability to select and choose what they want. And that's an opportunity, as one could see, right? That means that the more podcasts there are, the more variety that audiences can experience, and the better it is for the industry at large. And it also means that now we are going to see a lot more gearing and shifting from various other parts of the industry towards podcasting. So we are going to see a shifting from television. We are going to see a shifting of the medium being brought into television. You're going to see a shifting of how this particular medium is consumed. It borrows a lot of from radio and broadcasting. So we are going to see broadcasting being kind of reshaped and redesigned into podcasts. And we've seen a number of different radio stations that have taken their radio shows and have extended them to podcasts. So we are going to start seeing a lot more of this happening. We've seen TV shows that have extensions of podcasts where each episode is being discussed on a podcast. We've seen sermons of pastors preaching, and we see those and hear those particular preachings or messages, extended and transformed to podcasts. We've seen various different shifts within how the traditional way and traditional formatting of media and content is gearing towards that type of format. Some of the benefits of having a podcast is that it has both visual and audio benefits, right? You can have it on both ends. You can have your podcast in a virtual, a visual capacity, or you can have it as an audio, right? And either way, audiences will be able to have access to it. We're seeing that the visual element of it, of course, is what we get to see, and you find that on YouTube, and on various different platforms that are, podcast centric right now. We also see the audio version of it on High Art FM. We're seeing it on Spotify, on Apple, on. So what that really signifies to all of us is that this podcasting space is becoming a genre. It's becoming a medium, right? So we have television, we have radio, we have film, we have podcasts as well. So let's start kind of thinking about that as well. So if you are considering, what to do and how to go about figuring out this podcasting thing, another benefit that I want to, before I miss that one as well, is the benefit of a podcast being as I said, easy to, there's less barrier to entry. It is, the barriers to entry as well in the capacity of the quality, whereas a traditional television show has particular standards to it, and podcast has slightly less standards to being able to enter within the space. So there's less barrier to enter within that as well. There's less regulations around podcasting. So as we see now, people can say whatever they want to say, however they want to say it, whenever they want to say it. And of course, each platform has its own regulations, but it's a less regulated space compared to what a television and what film would be. And there's a little bit more flexibility to people's voices, and they have a lot more freedom within the podcasting space. So that's another benefit. But also, it's a little bit more cheaper to produce, or more affordable to produce for many people, and which is why it makes it a lot more easier for people to still have their voices heard, but still be able to produce, it as a content piece. So statistics have stated that there is over 2 million podcasts currently which are legitimized around the world at the moment, and we are seeing about 64% of Americans have listened to a podcast at some point in time, and we also know that 42% they have listened to at least one podcast within their lifetime. So that's a big number. 42% is quite a high number. There was a recent podcasting phenomenon that took place earlier this year, just as we entered the brand new year. Cat Williams, as well as on Club Shay Shay with Shannon Sharp, and it was very, very interesting. The numbers that they were able to achieve, 7.5 million views, I believe, in less than 24 hours from the podcast, and that signified, and that kind of really showed us what to expect this year, what to expect within the trajectory of podcasts, and where that industry is going and growing. Millions, 10 million, 7 million, I believe it's on 47 million views at this moment. But those are numbers that we'd find in television. Those are numbers that we'd find in films, right, at the box office. But we're starting to see these numbers now on on podcasts that people individually create, and that's showing us something that we are seeing the shifting of power, of who now has the right to tell stories and who has the power, who has the mic, who has the voice to tell stories. And it's seeming that the people are taking hold of that particular power. And as I said, we're going to be starting to see regulations slightly shift within podcasting, as the powers that be are going to obviously want to take hold of this industry. So we have to know how to go about navigating it and get into it now while it's still early in the game. Okay. That's just my advice, that let's tap into the podcasting industry now, while barrier to entry is a little bit more flexible, while it is a lot more affordable to create, and while the technicalities aren't that strict compared to regular traditional production values, which we are trying to aim for and what that we are striving for. However, anyone and everyone can create a podcast. Every brand, every product can create a podcast, which is why this is the best time to go about doing that, because very soon things might change. And if you're wondering and asking yourself, which podcast would be the best for me? And I'm here to help you, let you know about 8 types of podcasts, and you can select which one works the best for you, for your brand, and for your business, that will communicate the best way to your audience. The one question, and the most important question to ask yourself, is what type of content does my audience want? From this list of 8 podcast types that I'll be sharing with you today, which one does my audience rather want the most, and which one does it resonate with the most? So looking at things like checking your website statistics, checking your data on social media, and having a look at what does the audience resonate with the most, because that indicates what type of podcast would make the most amount of sense for you. If your audiences love short form content, creating a podcast type that is in a shorter side of the timeline. If your audiences love intrigued conversations, if they love digging deep into topics and engaging in within much depth of a conversation, then you want to consider and looking into long form content, right? Looking at an hour to 2 hours, and I've seen podcasts going up to 4 hours, because that gives the time to unpack a topic and unpack a layered conversation in that capacity. So looking at what type of content does my audience resonate with the most. And the first type of podcast that I'm going to be sharing with you today is called a conversational podcast. And this is where 2 hosts have, and of course, an entertaining and engaging conversation about specific themes, and topics similar to what you'd find as a radio show. And it's obviously it's a lot of engagement. I've watched a number of different podcasts that have this type of kind of banter between 2 hosts as they share their various different opinions about different topics. And it's often fun to see different sides of a particular individual. And if those two types of people are 2 individual types of people, so they have different opinions and views about certain things. So as an audience, we get to pick and choose a side on whose side are we on. It's fun, it's engaging. It's called a conversational podcast, and an example of this would be the Joe Rogan Experience. Would fall under the category of conversational podcast. And some of the pros about this is that it's a great way to provide, a range of different opinions, and having audiences, as I said, pick and choose a side and decide which one makes the most amount of sense to them. So that's the first type of podcast, a conversational podcast. One of the cons, however, for this is that it does require research, because whatever side that you're picking and choosing, it has to be quite informed. So I wouldn't even call it a con, but I would say something to be cautious about, that if you are going to go about choosing this particular route, you need to make sure that you are aware that this requires research as you're engaging in these topics and these conversations between the 2 of you guys, that you're coming up with topics and conversations and engaging on particular topics from an informed point of view, in order to not only just entertain the audience, but also to inform them on these topics that you are, or these themes that you're engaging on. So that's the first type of podcast one can consider doing. As I said, I love listening to these types of podcasts. I've seen a show like, Podcast and Chill, where you'd find McG and South African podcast, one of the biggest in Africa. You'd find McG and Soul Penduga just kind of having a conversation between the two of them, and just unpacking different topics of the week, you'd find yourself um kind of deciding who is on your palette. By the end of that particular season, you have your favorite co-host based on their views and their opinions. And I think it also it just makes the experience a lot more better when you can hear different opinions and kind of relate to different personalities on that particular set. So it's two people coming together, have certain themes, have certain topics, and then kind of go among themselves, about those particular topics. And it could be theme based, so it could be about relationships, and these two co-hosts just talk about relationships. It could be about sisterhood and woman empowerment, and these two hosts talk about woman empowerment. It could be about marketing or branding, and that's just the topics and themes that's kind of thoroughly discussed every week. So there's various different topics and themes that the podcast could be centered around, and then within that center we kind of nitpick every week a different topic from that particular overview of a topic that the podcast is about. If it's an entertainment podcast, every week it's all about what happened in pop culture this week, what happened in entertainment this week, what film came out. So there's various different things and ways in which one could unpack a particular topic. And I think it's also important that I note this now, that the beauty of having such a type of podcast is that because you have an unlimited supply of topics, an unlimited supply of information around, there's not one topic that can run out of information about it, right? There's tons of different things, tons of different angles and avenues that you can attack a particular topic on. And because this is between two people who are consistent on the show, we don't have new individuals coming in to add in their voice and their opinion. Of course, it could be structured, differently, where we have callers calling in, or people sending in notes, people sending in questions, but ultimately it's these two individuals, right? So to make sure that it's broadened out, which is one of the things about research, that you have the opportunity to research, but a topic can never run out. Like, there's no topic that can ever come to a point where there's nothing to talk about here. There's nothing. It's impossible. So whatever topic or whatever theme that you can have, there's an unlimited supply of information, and there's an unlimited amount of themes that could be discussed. So there's absolutely nothing. I personally am of the belief that there's a topic for everything. There's a theme for, like, everything could be a theme. I'm talking equipment, right? Filming equipment. And if I'm just talking about filming equipment in this entire podcast, there's an unlimited supply of filming equipment that I could talk about, right? I could talk about mics, I could talk about lighting, I could talk about camera, I could talk about the different types of mixers, the different types of switches, you can just never run out of topics. So I want us to come out of the limiting belief that you can run out of a topic, and that kind of holds you back from creating that podcast. No, you will have an unlimited supply of information. And if you don't know how to go about doing that, just send me a DM and I'll help you find topics or find episode ideas from one particular topic that you can have. Now, the next podcast type is a monologue podcast, and this is where a single host speak through the entirety of each episode, usually on a subject matter that they're an expert in. And you'd find this in an example of this would be someone who is a doctor, and in that particular podcast, they give expert medical advice. Someone who is a author, and they have expert advice on language and books. or they're doing book reviews. That's, there's not there can't be enough of things to kind of talk about. um so it's a single individual speaks to the camera as I'm doing now. So if this would be a podcast, then this would be a monologue podcast, because all I'm doing is talking about Media Mondays and I'm talking about media. So that's what it would be as well. um of course, the benefits of this, are plenty, but one of them being the fact that you can, it can be applied to any type of topic. So whatever expert information that you have, or whatever expert insight that you have on any topic, you are able to do that. And there's, there's no limit once again on what you can talk about, right? And another thing is that because you're doing it on your own, you have a little bit more control on the environment of it. So the time and when you do it, you have a lot more control on when and what you talk about, compared to what a conversational one would be, where you have to banter between the two of you and decide on those particular topics and times, shooting schedules, and etc., etc. Where in this particular case, it's just you, and you have maximum control of how things span out throughout the time. Of course, then the negative side to that is, there isn't much opinions, and there isn't much I agree, I disagree. So that limits the amount of insights, right? So if there was someone to kind of be like, Vuyo, I think that might not be how I would approach it, or that might not be how I would think of it. So that then makes it kind of banter related. So if it is a monologue type of podcast, it has that limitation. An example of this would be the monologue podcast. You can check that out, of course, on your digital streaming platforms, if you want to have an idea of what that looks like. The next type of podcast is called the storytelling and investigative podcast. Now, this one is where one or more hosts use each episode to tell a story or part of a story, right? It's very, very insightful. You'd find, some sort of investigational journalism in this particular realm, where we're telling, this is what happened today in the news. This is the stories that you can hear and learn more about and know about. And we're giving the audience a little bit of information about things that they might not know. This is what's happening in this country. This is what, has been happening. So it's that type of podcast that gives people information and stories and investigative kind of insight. And it's very immersive, and it's very informative. And it's, of course, but on the other side of that, it is that it requires a lot of research. So if you're someone who has time on their hands to make sure that your facts are straight, to make sure that you fact check everything, because these stories are nonfiction, that means that they have to have truth to them. So it's very important that you do your research, and you ensure that you are well acquainted with what it is that story is. If a question does then arise from an audience member, you are able to go about answering them. So I think it's definitely cool and insightful and informative and important. I think it's very important, this type of podcast. So if you have that urge, if you're a journalist, if you're someone who is a storyteller, a narrator, someone who has, things to share, and is seeing things, is experiencing things, and is going about experiencing stories, hearing stories from other people, and wants to share those, this is then, I think, the best vehicle for you to decide to choose this particular podcast. If you're a brand and you are, thinking about the best way to tell the story of your brand, right? Perhaps there's a story behind every product, and you utilizing a podcast to tell the story of that product. And you go into depth of what it means and why and how it was done and when it was created and what was the vision, and you're just taking us on this journey. You're taking us on the story, and you're that's what it would kind of fall under, as well. And if someone, I think, would want to break into the journalism industry as well, I think this would be a very great vehicle to put your voice out there, journalistic voice out there, to breaking news, what's happening in the world. This is your space. Okay, all you gotta do is just click record. An example of this is a podcast called The American Life. Wade, of course, gives stories of the American life, and go check it out and have and listen to it as well. It'll give you a bit of more insight on what that particular type of storytelling podcast is. The fourth podcast type is a roundtable podcast. It's of course it's a consistent or rotating group of hosts which provide commentary and conversation around specific topics. Whenever I hear the word roundtable, I think of the Hollywood roundtable, where experts in a particular field come together. If it's actors, if it's directors, we sit down and we just talk about it. Let's just have a conversation about it. And this type of podcast, of course, enables a variety of different, points of views, a variety of different ideas, a variety of different notions in which one could know to plug themselves in. It's often engaging. It takes the stress of one person, where now we are distributing the work, we're distributing the heavy lifting of the particular podcast. And also, because there's more of you guys, the reach of it will extend, because each individual might have a community of 10, 15, 100 people. They're able to share it with their community, while you share it with your community and they share it with their community. So it extends the far reach of it, because each individual will be sharing that particular podcast. So another benefit of having something within that capacity as well. It does, of course, if it is too homey and if it's too friendly towards, and I use the word friendly in the sense that if it's just a couple of friends who have inside jokes and they know certain things only they know, and they talk about those things that only they know, and then the audience cannot relate, right? Because the benefit of having a monologue podcast or a conversational podcast is that the audience is the person I'm speaking to. The audience, it's me and you, right, in this moment. And I am relating to you while you're relating to me. But if there's a group of us and we only relate to each other, you might feel left out as an audience member, right? So it's something that kind of, if you know that the people that you want to do this roundtable podcast with, you guys have, it's just you guys. And you might just be unaware of the audience that's in that with you, then you might find it a bit difficult to engage within that sense. However, it's a great way, once again, to bring together similar minds, similar personalities, similar points of views, or different points of views, but a similar goal to unpack a type of particular view that's important, right? So an example of this is a beautiful podcast called The Rounds Table, and it's a medical podcast that covers latest medical journals and research, and it's medical professions that come together, and we talk about medicine, we talk about discoveries and journals and research, and that whoever is listening to that will then get to come out of that, from all these experts in insight, know something better and know something more about medicine, etc. So if you are a group of people with the same type of kind of career, the same type, it's always very interesting to kind of hold and have these types of podcasts as well. Another, and we'd see, I mean, we've seen the impact of roundtables on like shows like The Talk, The Real, here in the US, and where people kind of sit and they unpack and they talk about different topics, and how really fascinating that could be, where we all find who we are within that group and resonate with that person as the season goes along. So that's something to check out as well. The next type of podcast is a theatrical podcast. This one I find extremely exciting and extremely funny and extremely engaging and extremely entertaining because it brings imagination to the voice. It allows the people listening to travel through space and time and to imagine stories. This goes far back. When I was in South Africa, there was a radio DJ who actually recently passed on. His name is Casey. And I grew up listening to him on the radio, and he did this marvelous thing where there would be like literal theater productions that we'd listen to on the radio, where that there'd be the different characters, and he would kind of play them all, and he'd be the son and the mom and the neighbor, and he would change his voice to suit the different characters. And I mean, storytelling in radio has existed for years, and that's how a lot of my grandmother would say they enjoyed entertainment. They would tune into the radio and listen to stories, and they would sit around the fire and sit around the house and just listen to these stories told on the radio, and they would imagine, right? They would see what these stories that are told are. So I think it's so beautiful how just things just keep coming back. Things just have a way of just coming. The world has a way of just keeping things from old, revises them and brings them back to life. So it's a full 360 kind of turnaround moment where we would have thought that storytelling on radio has died because of television, and now we are seeing a resurgence of that storytelling vehicle through podcasts, right? As I said, less barrier to entry, so now creatives in that particular space have the ability and the opportunity to do that. And I think this would be a great thing for actors, for theater performers, to extend their voice, right? Extend their storytelling and create a podcast where physically are acting with their voices. I think we limit ourselves so much in the capacity of what we could do. And I think another beautiful thing about podcasts is that it's showing us that we all could potentially have the ability to shift an industry around. Like, this type of podcast for me is an industry shifter, because it's showcasing that you can take a medium that might be seemingly dying. Everyone's like, oh, we're going to streaming. What theater COVID-19 did showed us that we couldn't go to the theater anymore. But this is a vehicle where the same actors could just come together and do acting with their voices and share stories with what animation does as well. So again, theatrical podcast, I'll go on for days if I have to talk about this. A theatrical podcast can be a single host narrating or entire cast of performers and sound engineers coming together to tell a story. This is engaging. It's fun. It's exciting. I think it's a type of storytelling that could be really fun for us to tap into. It does, however, require a high level and a high degree of creativity and skill, which is why I think trained actors, skilled actors should consider doing this for fun, even if it's just once a week. Just going on and taking some time to exercise your acting muscle, your voice muscle, your creative muscle, your storytelling muscle, writing these stories and kind of creating a fun experience for your audience to laugh and have a good time. Something to think about if you're an actor, if you're a writer, if you're a director. This is something to think about, and this might be on your radar as well. The Hamel cast is one type of podcast you can have a check out, that you can check out rather. It is, of course, explores the groundbreaking show Hamilton, and it's where the cast comes together, similar to this, exploring, right, this type of genre. And something also quite similar that I recently saw is where we are now finding films and TV shows um, where we are seeing snippets of a show. I saw this on Succession. A snippet of a show would be cut, sent to we'd play a little bit of a snippet of it, and then we would comment. There would be commentary by the cast or the writers or the directors, and talking about that particular scene and how that scene, what it meant, how it was done, and etc. I think there's just so much creativity that we don't explore. Like, who thought about that? Why didn't I think about that? Like, why are we not thinking about that? Where we are so stuck and so held on just like what's not there, where there is there. We just need to find and access it. Anyway, I'm going to go on forever. Let me go on to the next type of podcast. It's called a repurposed content podcast. And this is where we'd find a reiteration of a story available in another medium, such as print, video, and audio, kind of calibrated, reinvented into a podcast. So similar to what I just mentioned now, we'd see a movie snippet being put on a podcast. We'd see a TV show cast kind of taking a snippet and putting it on and then talking about it. We'd see a video that would be a full video, like a pastor on stage preaching, and then they would take that particular preaching, take snippets of it, cut it up, have it as a podcast series, or we'd see various different things, right? Actual on stage presentations by speakers, take that out. Now, the seventh podcast type that we're going to be discussing on this installment is, of course, the hybrid podcast. And this is where, as a creative, as a podcaster, you have the ability to nitpick and decide which type of podcast that you want. And you have the ability to, of course, mix and match basic podcast formats to create your very own style. Being, of course, aware that you signify and have a signifying style. So if you are someone who is deciding on a particular niche of type of podcast, make sure that if you're doing hybrid, then your audiences understand that variety and it makes sense to that particular audience from time to time. And this, of course, is one of the most done podcast formats. Another podcast format that is one of the most popular, and everyone has been jumping on this particular bandwagon, but it might not be for everyone. And I want you to be very selective on why you think this type of podcast makes sense for you. It's called the interview podcast, and we've seen so many people. I made an example earlier on about the Cat Williams and Club Shay Shay interview. That was an interview type of podcast, and it's when one or two hosts speak with a one or more guests on each episode. And there's two types of guests that you can have: an expert interview, an entertainment interview. And of course, an expert one is one that's more educational, one more informative, and gives insight to a particular career, job, industry, idea, theme, etc. An entertainment one is for entertainment purposes, right? We see a lot of times where these podcasts are trending, and I've seen a lot of the time so many people that do not enjoy asking questions, that don't like to speak to people, but choosing this particular format, and then they get tired of it because interviewing someone, it's a lot of energy, right? So you have to keep drawing out of someone energy. And I'll be doing another segment and another installment of extensive insight on this particular type of podcast because it's one that I'm familiar with. I've been hosting interview talk shows for over 5-6 years now, and it's something that I really enjoy doing, but there's also certain types of things that are kind of into play when doing it that I'd like to help you uncover as well. So I'm quite very familiar with that type of podcast, and that's the one that I'll be able to give a lot more rounded insight within. So I'll be sharing that with you as well. So you can pick and choose. Which one do you want specific? Do you want to do a hybrid type of podcast? But which type of podcast do you wish to do? And one that would make sense for you the most. And we've seen a number of different types of podcasts where it's a daily podcast. You can have a weekly podcast that comes out once a week, a bi-weekly, one that comes once a month. Of course, you decide, and depending again on your type of audience, what will make the best sense. But podcasting really is the future. It is the way to go. And these are the 8 types of podcasts that you can decide to have and choose from. And from there, you'll be able to kind of cultivate your podcasting game, which is going to be going forward and higher, because we're not going back. This year, we're going forward, and this year, we are going higher. I hope this was informative to you. I hope that this helped you kind of find your way into navigating what podcast makes the most amount of sense to you. As I said, you can decide one of these, or you can decide to borrow from all of these types of different concepts and different formats and decide what works best for you. That would then be the trajectory of your podcast. I am your favorite global media maven, Vuyo Joboda. That's all I have in store for you today. I'll see you next Monday with another informative and insightful conversation between me and you about all things media right here. I'm coming to you from New York City. I'll see you next week. From me to you, it's goodbye.